Good morning and welcome to this webinar. We had a great webinar last week and that's available on the TradeMalta website. Today we're going to have an interesting one. It's a discussion on 3 local companies that made it international. We're going to get to know them. We're going to get to know how they built their international business, what the challenges were, the opportunities, and most of all, we're going to see what we can learn from their journey. Before we do that, I'd like to remind you of the 3 webinars we have apart from the one of today and the one of last week. On Friday the 13th of November, we have a very interesting webinar on the new Pan-Africa trade agreement. We have great guests joining us, people who are involved in the negotiations of that trade agreement. So join us on Friday 13th of November for that. Following that, on the 18th of November, that will be a Wednesday, the 18th of November, we have a webinar on building resilience in organizations. Now that the new normal is with us, distance and being cautious in general, we thought of doing a webinar on how resilience can be built even in local organizations. And finally, a webinar on the 25th of November, where we will have the new British High Commissioner discussing Brexit and what doing business with the UK will mean from January 1st, 2021. If you're interested in any of these webinars, please visit trademalta.org for more information and actually to register. The running order of the webinar will be exactly like the one we had last week. We have 3 guests with us today, and we will have a discussion with them for the first 50 minutes or so. During the discussion and immediately after, you as participants are able to send questions, observations and comments in the chat function. We will be reading the questions aloud to the speakers and we'll be tackling the questions as we go along. These webinars are brought to you with the support of our strategic partners, HSBC, as well as Studio 7, where we are today, essentially in their studios. But today, it's about software companies. These are 3 very interesting stories because from their base in Malta, they've created an international business. And we're going to get to know the ins and outs and what we can learn from their experiences. We have 3 people who have lived their entrepreneurial journeys themselves along the years in making these companies what they are today. And therefore, I'd like to introduce, first of all, the 2 persons I have with me here in the studio. I have John De Giorgio from Shireburn, founder and chairperson of Shireburn. Thanks, John, for being with us. I also have David Vella from Altaro. And joining us remotely, this time, we have David Darmanin, who's the founder of Hotjar. So, gentlemen, first of all, thanks for accepting to share your experiences with us. I'd like, first of all, to give you the floor so you give us a bit of an idea of what your companies do and how your international journey has been so far, to give us a bit of a flavor of, the main milestones, if you like, of your international story. I don't know if John wants to start.
Fine, yes, happy to do so. Good morning, everyone. Well, we're a 37-year-old company, so the journey's been a very long company. And during that time, we've created a range of different software products. And of those software products, probably today we're most known for our Indigo payroll and HR solution and our SBS for financial and inventory. Mainly because the other 2 products that we had created, which were the ones that launched the international aspect of what we do, are products which are not particularly aimed at the local market. So one of these was an integration tool that we launched. I remember the date, it was actually 9/11 that we launched the product. That's the Integra product. And more recently, the CA Plus product for the airport industry, which helped airports to manage what is referred to as their non-aeronautical business. And both those products, by their very nature, were international pretty much from the get-go. Although in the case of the airport solution, what we had was our launch customer was Malta International Airport, where we had originally created a project for them. And a while after that project was implemented very successfully, it was actually they at MIA that suggested to us that we should consider internationalizing the product. During that journey, what we did was we stepped back and did a much more thorough research and analysis and built up a strategy of the market opportunity and how to develop the market, how to go to market, essentially, with the product. Also the final strategy for acquisition of the product. And all of that was baked in to our thinking right at the beginning of our journey, before we actually started to create the product. That gives you some sort of flavor of what we're about, Joe.
Give us a bit of an idea of, what that company or that product is doing today. It's present in various countries, I think, and you've been through, a growth, period of, I guess, of many years already since you've started it.
Yes, well, that particular product, we actually did a soft launch in December 2011, was when we first launched the product at a conference and exhibition which was held at Heathrow Airport. Obviously, our target market was airports, so it was particularly relevant for us. And our strategy was to build the client base while building the product itself. So, as usually happens, you start off with a product which is less functional, and you keep adding functionality, one, as you get the confidence to do so and invest further in it, but also, two, as a result of customer feature demands, and also identification of opportunities to broaden the appeal of the product. That product, we built a client base with airport clients, not literally in every country in the world, but in various continents of the world, whether it was in the Middle East, in Africa, in the Caribbean, and in Europe. And during that process, we became attractive as an acquisition target.
And in fact, I wanted you to highlight that a little bit as well, because you've spoken about the acquisition. The acquisition was planned originally, or kind of you became attractive as you became successful as you went along, I guess?
Now, our strategy was that we would want to build a product for acquisition, because we felt that the nature of the product addresses a part of the industry which is very specific, which is the management of retail and food and beverage, hotels, car parking in the airport sector. And that was a unique product. There was no other product to do that. We were actually competing with people managing sometimes as much as $2 billion worth of revenue in their airport from this sector, and managing it on Excel. So our competitor was Excel. There was no other product on the market. But most airports actually lose money, and in fact half the world's airports lose money, and of the half that make money, only 10% of them make money out of flying passengers. So this is a critical part of the commercial aspect of an airport, and we felt that those companies, of which there are many, selling software to manage the operational side of the airport, the passenger handling, to put it crudely, would find it attractive to broaden the product mix to include this particular area, which specifically addresses the profitable side of the airport.
What is the company doing now after you've kind of hived off a very successful, internationalized product?
What is that company doing, or what are we doing?
You're doing
so
today?
At Sherburn today. So at Sherburn today, we obviously are constantly looking for new opportunities. So to me, one of the most important things in any business is actually opportunity identification. The ability to see an opportunity in a landscape where hopefully other people are not seeing that same opportunity. And this happens regularly. And sometimes those are ideas which are worth pursuing. Or there may be ideas which are certainly worth pursuing, but not necessarily the top priority. So there are constantly these ideas. I actually had one of these yesterday, which I've got a call about to start to discuss moving forward, potentially on that later today. So that opportunity identification is always there. There are some products or services which are more suited to internationalization than others. I personally am always looking for niche markets where you can clearly identify your target and you can then apply and direct your marketing resources into that particular opportunity. Where there is a product where your potential market is everyone, everywhere, it becomes a lot more challenging and expensive to address that particular market. So we're always looking for those, including amongst what we're currently doing at Sherburn.
Great. Thanks, John. David, I'd like to introduce you to the discussion. Altaro obviously is a very interesting story. Many people out there know about it, others don't. How did you start and how did the whole thing happen?
So Altaro, we are 4 co-founders, 4 Maltese co-founders. The company started in 2009, so now it's an 11-year-old company. And to an extent, it started a bit by accident, really. I mean, one of the co-founders, Stephen, used to work with him. The other 2 co-founders, they used to work together. We didn't know each other. We met by accident, and they had a prototype, which they're more on the engineering side, we're more on the product management and marketing side. And basically, we decided to open this company. We invested. The only ever investment we took was we invested 4,000 to 5,000 euros, right, between us, life savings at that time. And we started literally in a basement in a garage in San Juan, actually. Since then, right, I think we were lucky that we are 4 co-founders still involved in the business, right, and still good friends, right, because the more co-founders you are, the harder it gets, but we're still lucky. 11 years on, we're family. So what happened since then is that we started with products. We immediately went for international, right? We knew our experience was always international, not selling locally. So we immediately...
Your experience working for other companies before?
Yes, before other companies. It was always international. So from day one, that was the strategy, right? If we had to focus only on Malta, we knew that wouldn't have made... the company wouldn't have been probably here today. So what we started developing solutions which backup and data protection solutions which protect our customers' data in case against data loss. We started on the consumer market, and since then we moved to B2B, and that's where the company started growing. Today we are over 110 employees worldwide.
Okay.
We have offices in Macedonia, we have offices in US, UK, Germany, and France, and Malta. Most of the people are in Malta. And we have over 50,000 customers within the SMB space, right? So we don't do consumer anymore. It's all B2B now. We've been developing more products, right? It's always for an international stage, always international. And I think now we're over 100 countries, about 30%, 25% of the business comes from the US, and then about 20% plus something from Germany, and then the UK, etc. So we sell in the usual big economies, let's put it that way. And we sell also through partners, right? We have partners all around the world, which we work with to install and sell our products.
Great, David. Thanks for that. I'm wondering if David Darmanin is with us. David has founded a very interesting company, Hotjar, and we've always been very keen to invite David on one of our events. So finally we're here. David, I wonder if you can hear us.
I can hear you loud and clear. Can you hear me?
Great. Yeah, we can hear you as well. I'd like you to, share a little bit, the story of Hotjar, with us and with the over 100 participants that we have registered for today's event.
Yeah, so there are some similarities to the stories mentioned before, right? So Hotjar is a little bit of a younger organization. We kicked off in 2014. David mentioned a little bit about the stats of how they kicked off, which made me think it's interesting to talk about that as well. We invested a little bit more of our personal savings, and it was, even though 5 co-founders, 3 Maltese and 2 Swedish, a couple of us put in more cash. So it was a little bit a different kind of setup. But it was similar to David's story in the sense of individual contributors and some of us with leadership experience with different backgrounds, and we came together and said, actually, we're kind of combining 2 tiny startups together into Hotjar. So we were both pivoting at the same time, which is quite an interesting story. I'd say probably the biggest difference to what we mentioned so far is kind of we started in a virtual garage, right? So I had been working remotely before Hotjar already for a couple of years. I thought it would be the best route for us to be kind of remote or distributed from day one. So even though we were 3 Maltese, 2 Swedes, 4 of which are all in Malta, we all wore headsets and we barely met, and even though we were a few kilometers away from each other, so that when we hired people, they would join in the same setup, right? We wanted them to not feel excluded or not kind of part of the team. Since then, it's been an amazing journey. We've grown to 116 team members now across 24 countries. So everyone wearing their headsets in their different spaces. But obviously the company is now more sophisticated in that we have budgets and allowances for people to, nowadays not that much, but travel, meet each other, use co-working spaces, use cafes. So we've truly embraced that distributed. And then in terms of the company, Hotjar is similar to what Altaro have done, which is we've SME and we've gone for volume. So we now have just over 31,000 paying customers, but we also have a freemium model. So you don't have to pay to use Hotjar. So outside of the 31,000 paying customers, Hotjar is then used on way over 500,000 websites around the world. And that's what powers how the business is run. It's a product-led growth. So it's not a sales team selling company by company. It's creating that footprint through the usage of the free offering.
Great, and in the three highly successful stories and very interesting on many levels. But I guess a lot of people listening to us and watching us today would say, listen, if I have an idea, where do I start from? I wanted to discuss with you a little bit, how did you develop the product? How did you develop the service that eventually became, your international success? The first product. I guess both of you mentioned that you developed a product and then kind of you modified it. How did it happen, David or John, anyone?
Okay. So the first product was in the consumer space, right? It was basically quite boring, really. I mean, it's a backup, right, for home users. And it started really in a way, by accident. I mean, because Julian Simon, 2 of the co-founders, CTO and Chief Product Officer, developed a prototype, and Stephen and I, with experience in marketing and the product management, we said that we could commercialize this. And we did to a certain extent, right? But selling software to the consumer is something which I will never do again, right? Because
lesson learned.
Because you have a lot of, you can't charge a lot, right? So to make a difference, you have to sell hundreds of thousands of these products every year. But it started kind of by accident, right? And this is, I'm saying in 2009. However, in 2011, right? And while we were growing, right? That year, 2011, maybe we made 104,000 euros in turnover, right? So obviously, it wasn't particularly doing well at that time, right? We decided, we were trying to find, our developer, Julian Simon, were trying to find a backup, for them, where to back up, their source code, right? And that's when we realized that, there's a problem here that can be fixed, right? And we're in a certain technical environment, a virtual environment, we couldn't find a proper backup solution which can back up these virtual environments for SMBs, right? And SMBs is where we think we're good at. And that's when we started developing this B2B, only B2B product. In fact, in 2012, then when the company really started growing, right, from 104 we made 700,000 euros in turnover, right, from one year to another, and that's when we realized, okay, we're on to something. Since then, right, we continue new products, etc. But it started from trying to solve a problem which we ourselves had, right? When we talk about the B2B product, the B2C, it was a bit of a risk really because we're still happy at that time, right? We didn't do the proper market research, but it started. And I think most products are like that, right? I mean, trying to solve a problem which actually exists.
Yeah. But in your case, I guess you were trying to solve a problem which you had, but you had no client ready to buy the product at that point.
No.
You decided to go for it anyway.
Exactly. I mean, there is a bit of a gut instinct, right? I mean, first of all, you do a lot of research to what's in the market, right? I mean, first of all, is there opportunity? I mean, is it a problem really just for us or for everyone else, right? And we knew from research it was for everyone else. What we did is we identified the influencers, right? So we said, look, I mean, who are the influencers related to this technology, right? And they are system administrators which have blogs. We approached them, right? We asked for their feedback. We implemented some of the feedback. We made an alpha version. We gave them the alpha version for more feedback. Again, we implemented some of the feedback. When we launched the product, because they were helping us, right? They spoke about us, right? So it was a bit grassroots like that.
They were in the network.
Exactly, and that's how it really kickstarted, right? Through these influencers.
Interesting. So your first international opportunity happened through them as well, I guess.
For the B2B, yes. For the B2C, I mean, it was all the usual SEO, Google, advertising,
and pushing in that sense. Great. John, you had a different experience. I think you had a client, you said before.
Well, we had two different experiences with the two different global products. So the first one was that there was a customer who had a specific problem that we were trying to address, and we came up with a method of addressing it which was more generic rather than specific. So we solved the problem, but did it in a manner that could be repeated both for that customer in other situations similar to the one that they had identified, but also looking at it from the point of view of having this as become a tool to generically solve that particular issue. And this was an integration and a reporting tool that we had developed, this in the case of the Integra product. And when we saw that, and I noticed how the technical team had come up with the solution, and that's where the opportunity identification kicked in. So I can actually, if I could draw, I would draw this for you, that I was standing over the shoulder of one of the developers, understanding how he thought that this could be resolved, and the penny dropped, that this could become a product, and it could become a product to solve a problem that everyone using that particular technology had. And therefore it was not just a specific problem, like David has just discussed, but it was actually a generic problem. This was a problem that everyone had, and we could solve it that way. In the case of the airport software, again, the client, in this case Malta International Airport, had a specific issue of controlling and managing the process of the sales in the outlets at Malta International Airport. We came up with a solution as to how to do that and solve the problem. Pretty much end of story initially, until it was made clear to us by MIA themselves that they actually thought that there was some legs in this. There was some opportunity here, because they said, you know, we speak to other airports which are much larger and much smaller than us, and we never come across anyone who is anywhere near as organized in handling this aspect of the business. And this wasn't just the mechanical handling of the business, but the opportunity that it gave to the airport to identify what the actual sales profiles were of passengers on different flights, on different routes, on different airlines, for different categories of products. So it was the business intelligence aspect, which was actually the value add over and above the mechanical solving of the invoicing process, for the sake of argument, the control and invoicing. So in that case, you know, sort of we said, right, so if we are going to do this, you have to create a product, and the development of a product and the process involved in developing a product is very different to the process involved in undertaking a project for a customer. So we did some market research. I say some, not a lot, to be honest, because it's back to David's gut feeling. It was patently obvious that there was this opportunity. And what we actually did was we did look around. We ran a competitor analysis. There was no other product in the market that did what we did. There was a trend which Malta International Airport was one of the early adopters of the implementation of what's called a revenue share model in the airport industry. So we saw the market opportunity as being one which would grow further. And what we decided to do was completely redevelop the product from scratch. And that was critical. We didn't try to expand the scope and depth of the existing product or project, I would say, that we had done for Malta International Airport, but we stepped back and said, having learned what we've learned, what would we do if we started from scratch? Obviously, we were lucky because we were already an established company. We were a company that had its own financial assets already. We were a strong company. And so we decided to invest our own funds, the company's funds, in this rather, I would say, brave approach of redeveloping from scratch, making it multilingual from the outset, etc., etc.
And what was the first airport after Malta, therefore, that you kind of sold it to?
Copenhagen.
Copenhagen, okay. And how did that come about, if I may ask?
It was quite interesting, actually. It came about because I was speaking at a conference at Heathrow, which is aimed specifically at the airport IT sector. And I was speaking at this conference, and so was the CTO of Copenhagen Airport. And that generated the interest. Copenhagen are an airport which is very forward-looking in terms of its technology adoption. And we went through the process of actually onboarding them as a client. It took a year, by the way.
It took a year, okay. Airports are slow in that sense, I guess, and the sales process is a bit long. So. I wonder if David has a similar experience of, developing a product and selling it the first time. Has it been for you guys at Hotjar, the same kind of experience?
Yeah, we have quite an interesting story here in that it was a long process, but also a short process. Let me clarify what I mean by that. So previous to Hotjar, I actually failed a couple of times bringing a product to market, which was, I hadn't registered the company, but it was like this initial trying to get product market fit. And the reason why we failed was we weren't matching a product to the true market needs. And then the second mistake we did was we spent too long building it before validating that the market needed it. So personally, it took quite long, right? This was 2 years before actually launching Hotjar. And I mentioned there was 2 startups joining forces. The other startup had also kind of had a similar experience. So with Hotjar, all of us together, when we were discussing this, we said we want to move extremely fast this time and validate as quickly as possible. And that's why we put our own money into the startup. That was 1. 2, what we did, which is quite interesting, is to validate that we could work together effectively as a group. Okay. We actually built a quick, stupid product that we were not planning to sell. So we spent 2 weeks on it. Can we operate together as a group? So that was kind of first validating we can work together. And then what we did was we sold the idea versus the product. So we created a web page which described the product and showed the design after spending 3 weeks validating the technical implementation of doing this at scale. And then we got it out there in what's now become, since then, a standard of launching digital products is creating an early access beta program. So basically you're saying you get early access if you sign up, and the more you spread it to others, you bring others to it, the earlier you get access. And this approach was very effective for us because given our knowledge of digital marketing, we then kind of threw fuel on this fire. We already started to see people signing up, but then we said, let's forget territories or organizations, let's think roles. So let's promote this to marketers, to designers anywhere in the world. So we focused on communities, on Facebook or websites or magazines and whatnot. And then what happened on the back of that is we spent around 9 months in beta with around 20,000 active users in these roles, giving us feedback, using it. So this low friction approach of getting them to use it, validate the concept, and then launching commercially was very easy on the back of all of that kind of low friction work.
And preparation, yeah, interesting. I wonder, David, to start from you this time, the kind of the sales process or the business development, has it changed from the first phases of the company till what it is today? Has that developed, or you're still doing business development the way you used to do it when you were essentially a startup?
Yes, it has changed a little bit, but fundamentally no. So look, really the approach we took for our go-to-market strategy, and when we think about selling, has been that actually we don't sell. We allow people to buy from us. So this model, for anyone who wants to read up about it, is called a self-serve model, right? Which is very common in product-led companies. So what do we mean by all these terms? Product-led company means the company focuses most of its resources, time, and attention on product. It's typically low friction, so you don't need to speak to a sales team or get a demo. But instead, it's self-serve, right? So you come to the website, put in your details, you're given access. So the company is putting more focus on onboarding, on a very easy user experience. And this approach makes sense, so David mentioned it earlier, when you're going to a very, very big market, right? It would make no sense, for example, to do this with airports, right? Because why? It's like you're creating this massive funnel. There aren't many airports, so this approach would make sense, right? So again, depending on your idea, you want to internationalize based on the market and the product that you're building. But in our case, that was very effective. Now, but what happened to us was we were getting huge organizations, right? The biggest brands you can imagine in the world coming in and self-serving, right? And maybe paying us 29 euros a month. And then you'd have tiny businesses coming in and maybe paying us 89 per month. So what we realized was that our pricing and packaging in the way that worked was not very well suited to the different sizes of organizations, which was fine because initially our go-to-market strategy, again, I mentioned it before, was more focused on roles, not on organizations. So I guess our business development, primarily in the last 12 months, has now evolved to be a little bit now more organization focused. So depending on the size of organization, that onboarding and that experience changes a little bit. We have a small sales team, which is there to help the larger organizations to speak through the pricing, to do a demo, because now these guys actually want a demo.
Need a demo,
so it's kind of part of that experience, but we still lead with the self-service product-led model.
Fantastic. I guess David would have probably a similar experience in, though I guess when you launched your B2B product, there was a change there, I would imagine.
It's still actually very similar, but I think we had to build a sales team earlier than Hotjar had to.
Okay.
Because it's still, I mean, Altaro is, I think, similar to David's company, is a technology and marketing company, right? I mean, we sell, I mean, really, we push people to try our product, right? Because so that then they go through buying it online, etc. However, similar to what actually David said is, we're at the point, which was a few years ago, right? Where when you want to go for larger businesses, right, you need some hand-holding, right? You need to manage partners, right, manage relationships, etc. So it's, I think Altaro, the way to go to market, right, especially at this stage, right, of a certain growth, I think it's a mix between, I would say, Shire Burn, right, way of doing things, which I think is really a lot of more sales focus as well, to Hotjar, right, which I think they're more marketing slash product focus. So it's a bit in between, right? Certain larger accounts, you need more hand holding. And also, I mean, But still, I mean, loads of customers come to our website, they just buy the product and that's it. We never speak to them unless they want to.
So most of your marketing is e-commerce essentially. You spend a lot of stuff online.
Yeah, 90% of our marketing budget is, or maybe 80% is digital marketing.
And that drives traffic through your site and people
Yes. But I mean, obviously now we have a bigger sales budget as well because you need to manage, right, these partners. You need to manage larger customers. You need to do demos as well, right? Because not everyone is just going to go next, install and evaluate, right? So it is a bit of a mixed model, I guess, between both companies. Yeah.
But I guess Sharburn has a different experience in this sense.
Yes, a different experience, as both Davids have said. One, because the nature of the product is very different. I mean, the volume required for both the Altaro and the Hotjar product is much greater than we had experienced in the airport industry, and the ticket size is greater. I mean, the smallest deal is likely to be in the region of 130,000 euros and upwards from there. So you're making a small number of sales, and the sales process is a much more technical and supportive process. So obviously, demoing is part of it. We clearly have to demo the product, but the technical complexity around the product in many ways is much easier to understand than probably the much lower in terms of more closer to the hardware, so to speak, type of software that both Hotjar and Altaro have. In the case of Sherburne's product, the complexity is in understanding and communicating the value that you bring to actually say, listen, if you do invest this $100,000, $200,000, $300,000 compared to doing things as you're doing today with Excel, which is probably costing you nothing except the time, you will get these extra benefits which compensate for that cost by providing extra value. So it's about the nature of the product and the nature of the market itself.
Because I guess in the airport market you have conferences, trade fairs, all specialized in that field and in that area, and I guess you were very present in those spaces, no?
Yes. Our marketing budget was mainly focused on that. It's back to the point that I had made earlier of the value of the niche market. Because if you look at the airport industry, for instance, there are 15, I would say, significant-sized airport conferences around the world every year. We used to participate in about 6 or 7 of those. And of those 6 or 7, only one actually focused specifically on the non-aeronautical, what's normally called commercial, although the operational side is also commercial. So there's one major conference in the world on that. And the others were more operational. But generally speaking, what we would do is we would tempt people who maybe had an operational focus to actually pass on information about what we were doing to their colleagues within their own airport. I have to say, in this area, our strategy, which is built on the conference attendance and speaking at conferences and putting up stands at these exhibitions, TradeMalta played a very important role in that through the schemes of internationalization that TradeMalta had, which we were able to actually work very effectively with the team, the whole of the team at TradeMalta.
Great. I guess to retain, these kind of products and services, cutting edge and all that, I wanted to introduce 2 concepts that I believe are underpinning, the three stories. The concept of people. How do you attract people, and is it easy to attract people when you're a startup than today? And also how that combines with innovation, which I guess is again, always there at the back of your minds. Innovation and people. How do you manage those, 2 big things, David?
All right, when we started Altaro, I started hiring first time, which was in 2012. We all had our network of contacts, right? So we reached out to people. Yes, most of them are still actually working, with us today. How we attract people? I think what's critical, first of all, it's not easy to attract people, right? What's critical is the culture, I think the company culture, because when you have a good company culture, sometimes you get recommendations, right? People talk about the company culture, right? And people would want to work with you, right? So, but it's not as straightforward, right? It's not, it's a very soft, kind of, you can't force it. Sometimes it has to come from the top down, right? And it just reverberates throughout the whole company. But I think company culture is important. And what it boils down to is trust, really, right? Is trusting the people, right? First thing you do is to trust the person, right? Even if sometimes you might get bitten, right? But the thing is, if you try to put a rule to protect yourself from one time getting bitten, right, everyone's suffering, right? So first and foremost, you trust. And 99.9%, right, I mean, it's never an issue, right? Yes, we do have flexi working, etc., right? But I mean, we know, right? I mean, the people, we still have a good relationship with everyone and we trust everyone. So I think you generate, I'm not using the right word, aura, right? But what happens is that people talk about working, for example, at Hotjar in this case, and then people would be interested to join.
Reputation, I guess.
It's reputation, I guess, yes.
You know, you build a reputation and people would want to work for you because the company stands for...
And respect as well, right? I mean, respect for everyone.
It comes with reputation. John, people, has it been, a challenge for you? And is it different when you were, a much younger company than it is today?
I'm not sure that it was, actually. I fully endorse what David has said about the culture. And in fact, the importance of the culture is not only your ability to attract new people to come into the business, but the ability to actually retain the people that you have. So we have some extremely long-standing, as a 37-year-old company, you can imagine, got some very long-standing members of our team, and that is also back to exactly the same points that David was talking about, of respect, being, providing a culture where people find that they can also grow themselves. So that's important. Obviously, we all know in this industry, recruiting people has traditionally been a challenge. And obviously, the current situation that we're in at the moment is disrupting some of those elements. So there are more people coming onto the market than before. The recent vacancies that we've posted, the number of applicants that we've had for the vacancies that we've opened up over these last 3 or 4 weeks on our website, the numbers are massively up compared to what they were a year ago or 2 years ago. Yes, absolutely. Also because people are looking for stable companies to work with. They're looking to work in stable sectors. So I think that's important. That's important too. So things are changing in that regard. Well. And I think also the fact that we've all got so much more used to remote working, the diffused, the distributed nature of companies is going to continue to grow, including recruitment of people who
are remote, like from day one.
Completely, and not necessarily setting up a development center in Honolulu. I'm talking about individuals all over the place, and it doesn't really matter where they are.
Exactly, and the flexibility there, of course, helps to attract and retain people. David, I guess you're probably, the larger company of the three, but you've obviously started, between you guys, the people who set up the company. Has attracting people been, an issue for you, and is it easier today?
Yeah, look, I talked about what we were trying to build with the business, right? So when you're trying to build an international product-led self-serve business that caters to a lot of people, it's not easy to find the right people. So in our case, I'd say the people aspect has been one of the biggest challenges. And yeah, I guess the best way of putting it is at Hotjar, we decided really to take the painful long-term gain approach, right? What do I mean by that? We kind of said, listen, it's very likely we're going to need a relatively large team over time. We're going to grow and we're looking for specialists eventually. So we actually started to hire internationally, right? So product and engineering for Hotjar sits in the European time zone, but then all other departments and roles sit more horizontally close to our customers where they are around the globe. But early on, as you can imagine, it's very difficult to attract and hire people when you have a virtual garage. You know what I mean? Like, I think it's even worse than a garage. So like there are actually funny stories of the first dozen of people that worked for Hotjar telling their family, there's these 4 guys in Malta with headsets, they've employed me and I'm going to work for them from home. And most people were saying, okay, like, is this real? Is this like
What kind of company is this?
dodgy? Yeah, what's going on? So because of that, I think what we did is we invested a lot very early on in telling our story and talking about our purpose. We blogged about it. We talked about our values. So we're quite obsessed about our values and defining them. So it was painful in the beginning, right? Like when you're, again, very tiny, trying to have this footprint globally, it was super uphill. We made some mistakes, like in terms of fit and like also figuring out like what type of profile and a person we're looking for, right, to make this work. But now that we've put in that pain and grit into that, now we're very lucky, all things considered, that we've created a brand when it comes to distributed teams and remote. Hotjar is kind of someone that's looked up to. We're kind of referred to. Our content is mentioned a lot. So yeah, we're considered to be a good employer now, and we have very, very high demand. So that kind of risk, that pain paid off quite well.
It became easier. David, I want to ask you something generic, and I want to ask the other speakers as well. If you had to share with us, 3 or 2, major decisions you've taken, throughout your career that you think were, very fruitful, positive, and I'm going to ask you about your mistakes as well later. So, can you share something like that with us?
Okay, so 3 decisions that were good decisions, basically, right?
Yeah, that made a difference,
impact. Yeah. So I'd say, look, the first one was definitely taking the risk to build Hotjar, right? Like, I left a very good consulting gig, working with some of the biggest business in the world. Like, I was working remote, right? Like Fortune 500 companies and everything, because I wanted to do something where I built equity, where I impacted more people, provided more value. That was a very difficult decision. But again, it's important to remember, like, there's no reward without risk, right? So that was probably one of the most important decisions. I think second after that was us, the founders of Hotjar, taking a long talk between us and saying, listen, we need to professionalize the leadership of the team and bring in outside executives. I think that was a second very, very important decision. And I'd say the third is that I've been very, very careful to not necessarily follow the advice of advisors or investors who've kind of told us follow this cookie cutter approach. And we've said it doesn't feel right. And we've resisted that. And now looking back, I think that was like 3 key moments, but that was kind of a good call to kind of stay true to the story you believe in.
Exactly, and retain that belief, all the way. David, I'm going to draw you into this conversation of the 3, important decisions you've taken.
I'm not sure about 3, but I think actually very similar to David. What David said as well. I think the fact that we started Altaro, right? We took that risk, which to be honest with you, it was quite an easy risk, right? Because I think and a lot of people don't realize this, because we are I'm lucky at least to be in a market, right, where if you open and you start up, right, and you fail, the worst thing that can happen, right, we're in Malta as well, is you get another job, right? So, I mean, obviously, if you have certain commitments, right, if you have family extra, that changes things. But I think one of the best decisions was to actually say, this is it, we're going to go for it, right? And I decided myself personally that I'm going to go for it when I asked the question to myself, and I remember actually that case was in a balcony in the office. I said, what's the worst that can happen? And the answer was, I get a job, right? That was the answer. And then, I mean, I think the second decision was when we went from B2C to B2B, right? That is when we said, after 2 years of developing the B2C, right? I mean, we were getting a bit tired, maybe not seeing the revenue that we're hoping to see. And so for us, starting a new product, right? I mean, it was a bit challenging idea, right? Because do we want to invest more into this? But we decided to go for it, and the product did well. So I think those are the two best decisions. that
Yeah,
you can say.
very good. John, what about you? Many years in the business. I'm sure you've taken many decisions, of course.
Yes. Well, I think our situation was also rather different than that explained by David at Hotjar and at Altaro, in the sense that we created these two particular products and other products like our Indigo platform out of an existing business. So this is where you have innovation, where you have the risk of causing disruption, which actually breaks down something you already have to actually build something bigger moving forward. So those situations become slightly different to the ones described, because what you've got is existing clients on existing products, which you are going to obsolete by new products. For their benefit long term, and you need to always look back at your existing clients, because the responsibility that I feel and our whole leadership team feels at Sherburn to the client is our primary focus, because we need to ensure that we continue to serve the client's needs moving forward. So, but clearly the decisions that we took to make that productization of an idea initially back in 2001, exactly the same process that led to us saying, fine, let's go for this with CA+, let's redevelop a product and go into a sector internationally that we actually had no experience of operating them. We were operating with companies which are highly regulated businesses, very big businesses. And then eventually also with our Indigo platform to rebuild completely from scratch, to build a new platform for all of our future product development. So I think those three were quite significant. I'll add a fourth one, if I may, a much smaller one, which was the realization of the importance of marketing back in 2001, where there wasn't this whole digital marketing type of opportunity as there is today. It was much less available. But the importance of the importance of marketing when going into an internationalization type of process rather than just into a local focus type business is a massive mindset and budget shift.
Commitment.
Also.
Absolutely. Will you be able to share with us some, mistakes you've done or things?
How much time do we have?
We actually have about 8 minutes just to remind all our kind of participants. We have questions. I can see questions coming in. Please continue sending your questions. In about 10 minutes or a bit less, we'll try to start taking the questions. So we have some time.
Okay, I was being facetious saying, do we have the time? I don't think there are that many, but there are some which were important. So, for instance, to me, the single biggest mistake we made with our Integra product back in 2001 is not getting the pricing strategy correct. We undersold the product massively. So the pricing of the product should have probably been in the region of 10 to 15 times greater than what it was. And the impact of that was that since our go-to-market strategy was a channel-driven one, there wasn't enough value for the resellers compared to the effort required to make the sale. And therefore, they weren't incentivized enough in that process. So that was certainly one of the mistakes. Very easy to make, particularly in software, because it's an intangible product, so getting your pricing right is important. But of course, that served us in good stead when it then came to our next internationalization with the airport industry, to actually think much more clearly and based on experience, although it was a different product and sector.
Absolutely. David, what about you? Any regrets or mistakes?
Yes, we did mistakes. I think the thing is, what happens is sometimes when you do mistakes, right? I mean, we as a team say, okay, we did them and we move forward. But I think one of the most recent mistakes I did was, and this was more of a technical / operations decision when we released a product where we decided to host certain data ourselves, right? Which we didn't realize the implications when it comes to certifications, etc. And because of that, we had to invest much more in people, hiring more people just to take care of that part. I think that is which made a big decision. For some time, it made it difficult for us. But having said that, right, I mean, mistakes, I mean, we made a lot. Even when we started Who's Backup first time, Who's Backup was the first consumer product. Again, I mean, I don't think we actually we didn't do the proper research on what the opportunity size are, right? I mean, we're very lucky that we arrived 4th year selling it. But I think those are two main ones. And actually the third one, maybe it took us a bit more time to invest into the channel, which John mentioned. We invested a bit late.
Okay.
I think we could have done it much earlier.
Try to anticipate it before and start. What about you, David? Have you done any mistakes over the years?
Too many to mention. I think like what is already said, right? Like if we're not making mistakes, we're not learning fast enough, right? So at Hotjar, actually, we like to say we learn from our mistakes, but we don't let them define us, right? So, I would focus actually on the mistakes where kind of we consistently made that mistake. That to me is kind of the bigger mistake, like not learning fast enough, if that makes sense. And the two I'm going to mention kind of contradict each other. So I'd say, no doubt, looking back as a trend of kind of at Hotjar, what we could have done better is definitely not investing fast enough, given the opportunity that we have, especially when it comes to building leadership teams out. Especially when you're bootstrapped and you don't have investors kind of putting pressure on you or telling you what needs to happen next. There can be a little bit of hesitation and figuring things out. So you're kind of investing behind the curve versus maybe investors want to always be investing ahead of the curve. So ideally, we should have put more focus on investing on the curve, if that makes sense, like always being there, present, ready to go. Now, the flip side of that, though, just kind of it's a contradiction to the first one, is sometimes I haven't listened, especially when people is involved. I really believe that you should not rely on first impressions or like a gut feeling in general, and you should instead define the strengths you're hiring for, right? You shouldn't be hiring for lack of weaknesses. Hire for specific strengths, and you should do scorecarding and voting and everything. But sometimes if you just don't feel it's right, then it's not right. And sometimes I haven't listened to myself on that front. And I think those are important mistakes. When you don't feel like you're getting the right partner on board, I think that's something definitely worth learning from. So it's kind of the ideal is that you're investing and you're bringing the right people on board. And I guess what I found now that I found the stride in this is you need to give it importance. You need to do it with good intent and planning. And if need be, use headhunters, network. Like you need to really put your full energy and grit into it versus kind of expecting it to happen.
Yeah, I guess especially in those kind of businesses, I imagine where, as we mentioned before, talent kind of moves much more. Even though, as John mentioned before, things are in fact changing. We're about to start taking some of the questions we have from the audience. I wanted to, in fact, actually we can go with the first question whenever that is available. We have two questions. I'm going to read one of them. Was the business mission based on your capabilities or on the spirit of identifying market opportunities and putting together a team to set strategic objectives for your startup? The latter appears to be the case with Hotjar. I'm not sure if you understand the question. And if anyone wants to tackle it.
I'm still trying to understand it.
Yeah. Was the business mission based on your capabilities or on your spirit of identifying market opportunities and putting together a team to set strategic objectives for your startup? And it actually says the latter appears to be the case with Hotjar. Do you want to react, David, or shall we take a reaction from the studio?
Yeah, look, my answer to the question is we scratched an itch that the market was feeling, right? So we were successful because the timing was right. Like usually these are the biggest variables, right? Like you're building something that the customers really need and you're doing it at the right time. You're not doing it too early or too late in the market. So there's the big factor of luck. And then, yeah, we built a good team that kind of could build that quickly. There's no such thing as the perfect team. So I think probably the most important thing was definitely focused on the customer, timing.
Yeah, timing is really, really key. Any other reactions to this question, or shall we move on to the next one?
No, same thing, right? I mean, there's a problem, right? I mean, we said we need to find it.
Market-driven.
And went for it.
Absolutely. We have another one saying, how did you raise the necessary initial capital required to launch your international initiative? Because I guess in the discussion, we've talked about financing to actually start the startup, but I guess there is, and probably the question is pointing towards that important step in investment that a company needs to do to actually internationalize. And how did you, raise capital to do that? John or David? John.
Well, I think probably I would suspect that our situation was different because I think I briefly mentioned that we already had an existing business. We had successful products which were generating cash flow and profitability into the business, and we just decided to direct that into that addressing that market opportunity that we saw. So we didn't need any external investment to do that.
Okay, so you financed that internally, essentially.
Correct, yes.
Because of the stage, because you had clients before, as you were explaining. David, is your situation?
So, I mean, look, Altaro from day one was go international, right? I mean, so as I mentioned earlier, right, we put 4,000 to 5,000 euros in. However, it wasn't just that, right? Because the four of us were working there without the seller, right? So there was a lot of sweat equity going in. Yeah. So that was the initial capital we needed. I mean, since then, we've always been investing a lot of our profits to continue growing. We never took investment, so we're still independent like that. But it was mostly sweat equity and some cash upfront, really.
Yeah. David, what about you? Did you need, a capital kind of injection to start an internationalization drive?
Yeah, similar to us. So I think rather than starting an internationalization drive, it was more scaling what was already international at the very beginning. So we did around 200,000 of our own money initially. We were then profitable, but maybe it was a mistake, but we then invested more of our money into the business because as a CEO, I wanted a bigger buffer to take decisions and just feel that confidence of having some cash. We didn't really kind of use the cash, but it definitely gave us the confidence to take bigger steps.
Risks, yeah.
We did actually have term sheets from 2 investors, but we decided not to take investment because we were then quite quickly profitable and growing. And similar to what John and David mentioned, we used our profits to continue scaling.
Yeah. How is the pandemic affecting the 3 businesses, nowadays? I guess, things are different on an operation front because people are working from home and this and that. But how is it affecting you in commercial terms?
No, from our end, I mean, we have multiple products, right? I mean, what we're noticing is, because we have products which we sell under what we call a traditional perpetual model and a subscription model. What we're noticing is that, which is a typical CAPEX and then OPEX. What we've been seeing is that more customers are going for a subscription operation expenditure model. And it's interesting that it was immediately seen as from April, right? More customers buying subscription than the traditional license model.
Yeah. John?
Well, operationally, it hasn't actually impacted us very much because we were always, from an infrastructure point of view, geared up for remote operations. We had various people choosing to work from home from time to time. We had some that didn't, like our help desk team and our receptionist for obvious reasons. But we transitioned into the remote side very, very easily because we were geared up for it. But in terms of the operation itself, we've continued pretty much where we left off. There have been some changes in some sectors, and some products have increased and others have decreased. But things are working out quite well.
Fantastic. We have a question at David. The problem is we have two Davids in here today, but I'm going to try to take it from the sense of the sentence. You mentioned that as existing beta clients introduced your business to new clients, they would get more access. What was the thinking around this? This can only happen because you had a strong product market fit early on. That's not usual. Were you lucky? I guess this means David, who's joining, who's David Darmani. David.
Yeah, it's so what was the thinking around this? So first off, like, in my opinion, to have a successful business, you need to have strong word of mouth, right? Like, that means you deliver something to someone and they like it so much that they're willing to tell others about it, right? There's actually a survey, I'm going to mention it because this is our industry, right? There's a survey you can do to measure with your existing user base, which is called Mps Net Promoter Score, which measures the likelihood of someone actually mentioning you to someone else. I think this is super important to have in your business because it makes growth much easier, right? So again, I mentioned product-led growth, self-service. You can't build this type of business without a high MPS. So when we think about businesses like Apple, right? Or from B2B point of view, Atlassian, right? Slack, these type, or Microsoft Teams, right? All these products have very high MPS scores, very high word of mouth. So really, I'd say, were you lucky? I'm not sure, right? I mentioned before this was the third time doing it, right? So I think perhaps we were lucky in the timing in that there were so many people that did not have what we were offering. And I'll explain a little bit what that means. Hotjar launched into an industry where there was very high friction offerings, sales teams, high prices, right? They were selling obviously to big companies, but the small and mid-sized companies were underserved. There wasn't something that was kind of really well built for them. So that's what I meant by we were lucky, yes, with timing, in that we came out and said, hey, this is going to be 29 euros. That's the entry point. No sales teams, no demos. And by the way, it's the functionality of 5 products in one, right? So I think that's what got people talking about it even before they had actually used it, right? We hit that sore
pain
kind
point,
of spot that they were feeling. And that's kind of more disruption than innovation, right? The technology in itself wasn't new, but the way we packaged it and the go-to-market strategy was different.
Yeah. Interesting. Thanks for that, David. I have another question. To what extent did teamwork contribute to your success? I mean, we can start with David and then we move to David and John here in the studio. Or is it just led by one person?
No. I'm thrown off by the question because I think you cannot be successful if you're not operating as a team. So I think that's the answer from my end.
Yeah, absolutely. Anything else? Teamwork, gentlemen.
It's an obvious answer, right? Teamwork is critical for us.
So it's not. No, I guess the question is motivated by the fact that people see, one founder, CEO, etc., driving the business all the time. So there's, whether the role of a team behind that person. I have 2 more questions coming in here. Technology in the sector has been growing exponentially. Sharburn has been in the business for decades. How can they succeed to keep their organization up to scratch to compete with younger setups? Let's take that one first.
Okay, that's a great question. Always a challenge, obviously, and it's not just a question of younger or older. It's a question of the product offering and the whole offering, actually, not just the product offering, that a business can bring to their customers. So it's not just about product, it's actually the whole experience, so that when someone has a particular issue, they feel that they have a support network that they can address. And when I'm talking about a support network, I'm not just saying, I don't know, my software isn't printing for the sake of argument or whatever. In other words, the technical aspect of the product. But most of our support calls that we receive are actually calls that genuinely, we should be able to say, well, you know what, you should actually be phoning the Inland Revenue Department and asking them that, or you should be asking the Social Services Department that. But we don't do that, and we provide that as the more holistic type of service. So that's what I say. It's not just about product; it's the overall
service experience.
But clearly, innovation is a big disruptor, and generally speaking, people don't want to innovate if they've got something which is working right, because you need to destroy to innovate. And if you've got an attitude, as we do have at Sherburn, of destroying to innovate to make better, then you are in a situation that you can continue to provide your offering at a maximum level. So I think that's a challenge, being brave enough to destroy so as to create new.
Exactly. And that is, I guess, irrespective of how kind of old and young the company is. We have another question related to different markets. You've all worked in different markets. Is the experience in, for example, the Middle East, Asia, etc., on a B2B level different from dealing with clients in Europe? Who wants to take that one?
Yes.
It is, I think.
I'm happy to feel it. I don't know if anyone else, and my experiences will be a bit different, but we've worked in various parts of the world, and some are easier to work in than others for different reasons. So, for instance, our work in the Middle East has been painful. It's been painful to obtain customers. It's been painful to work with customers once you've obtained those customers for a variety of reasons. It takes long. The process is even longer than it would be in some of the other parts of the world that we've worked in. And there's complexity around that. If you look in the North American market, it's also complex, but for completely different reasons. In that case, it's actually the contractual aspect and the liability aspect which adds complexity there. So, every market has its own difficulties, and unfortunately, in our case, we had a product that needed to be global. We couldn't just say, you know what, we're just going to focus on airports in the UK, of which there are, or in Germany, of which there are 22, and those are our focus, and we'll work just with those. Ours is a much more horizontal market in that respect from a geographic point of view.
Have you felt, David, yourself, a different kind of cultural experience when you were selling? I believe in the B2B case, you sell in the US, for example, no?
We sell everywhere. Sometimes, right? But I mean, for the business that comes online, right, through digital commerce, I mean, you don't really see the differences because you're a bit abstracted. When, however, building or working with channel partners in different regions, then there are different cultures. Not necessarily negative or positive, really, but it's that you have to work in a bit different way. But most of the time, it doesn't really make a difference because most of the business would be done
is mediated,
digitally,
like anyway,
right?
Yeah.
But yeah,
it's kind of mediated anyway. David, I wonder if you have something to add to this kind of cultural debate. Doing business in different cultures.
Yeah, I'd say, look, there are nuances and differences, right? Even just expressions or styles of doing business. Given that the majority of our business is self-service, it doesn't impact us a lot. We notice these nuances, but we've not seen, there's no opportunity in us to, for example, personalizing or catering for a different experience based on territory. In the future, as we expand east, it's likely to happen, right? It needs more kind of changes, but it's more localization rather than per se cultural. So I'd say overall, especially when you're doing low price volume, I don't think it shouldn't be a blocker. I think it's more of an optimization thing that you can do.
Which you adjust as you go along. David, I wanted, before you mentioned developing, leadership within your teams as you start growing. So I have a question related to that. Have you, as a leader of a startup back then, and as a leader of a 100+ employee organization today, changed? And is it difficult to find people nowadays in your organization who are happy to take on leadership roles?
No, it's a good question. So actually, pre-COVID, one of the biggest questions I used to get from executives is, can I be a leader in a remote world? And what does that mean to my career? And how am I going to have impact? So in that, if there's any positive to COVID, it's made those conversations easier, because nowadays everyone's kind of seeing this as a new reality. But yeah, I think it's pretty much like the same level. Like it's difficult to find leaders regardless, right? Like, because ultimately you need to find values fit, or some people call it culture fit, we call it values fit. You need to find stage fit, right? So there's so many variables that I think, again, as a leader, as a CEO, like this is probably one of the most important things to focus on. But I would say, and this is kind of, I think I understood the question about teamwork after it was asked. Look, our model of leadership is servant leadership, right? So we don't believe that a leader comes in and drastically changes the direction or the way we do things. For us, really, the leadership, the exec team is there to support the teams that do the work. And we call this the trust from day zero in the team, right? So we are building a team to do the work, to take the decisions. So ultimately comes back to that, right? So to answer the question about teamwork, that's it. Like as a CEO today, like my job is to make sure we've got the right strategy, the right direction, we've got the right people on board, but like I'm not involved in those details. It's the team, right? So in reality, then, to answer your question, with leadership, it's finding people that can fit all those variables, and that's not easy, right? In a remote environment.
Exactly, and especially as the company grew over the years, and it's no longer a startup, and therefore it's a much more complex company nowadays.
Correct.
And it has leadership been an issue for you in your companies? I guess you yourselves, first of all, because you used to run a startup. Nowadays you run a much more complex company. But is it also difficult to find executives who are ready to take leadership roles today?
No, I mean, it's not easy, right? I mean, we hire from within, but we also sometimes hire for leadership positions. We're lucky that we were able to hire from within a lot of times, and that's I mean, those will be employees which have been worked a successful number of times and proven themselves, right? But I think what David said is a very good point, right? About our job is more to enable the team, and I think that's critical nowadays. But when it comes to hiring leadership, nowadays it's mostly we did a lot from inside, from internal the company, but we also are looking, for example, for remote US positions, for example, would have to hire for that position as well.
Externals. John, your leadership experience over the years?
Well, like David was just mentioning, our policy and preference has always been to grow people and nurture people within the business. And we're lucky that we've got very high retention levels. So our leadership team is probably the person who's been working least long with the business, has been working maybe 14, 15 years with the business already. So that's been successful. And generally speaking, we've actually found that when we have hired externally, it's generally speaking been less effective. It is a challenge. I think it's a particular challenge that we have in Malta, because leadership is not just about the whole process of understanding the market you're in or the product you've got, etc., etc. There are a whole load of other components that you require, particularly a lot of specific soft skills. And I'm not sure that our educational system in Malta is actually building those types of people for preparation for leadership roles in the future. So I think that's a problem that we're creating at the moment, which we're going to be facing
in the future.
Future.
Absolutely. Thanks. We have a question on planning. Do you do long-term planning, or do you just follow clients and kind of react to what clients would want, as long as you're focused on clients?
It's a mixed model, really, right? I mean, you have short-term, medium-term, and long-term plans. you always have long-term planning, right? But you still need to have the mid-term, right? Because by the time you get to long-term, you have to have, you need to continue generating business. But you always have long-term planning. But along the way, right, there are milestones, which ideally milestones can be commercialized to get there.
John,
No, obviously,
planning.
Planning is very important, but so is agility.
Yeah.
And finding the balance between those two. And when you mix into that the opportunity identification, there is the risk of being disruptive and actually causing even internal disruption with people actually saying, well, we were working on that and now we're working on something something new, or our focus is maybe shifting. I think it's important to strike the balance there. What I am a great believer in is the idea of the strategy. Knowing where you want to get to eventually is very important, because then what you need to do is you need to align all of your steps, not necessarily in a straight line, but in the same direction towards that eventual target that you want to try and reach. So planning with agility. I
So
think
there is exactly that balance between planning and agility. We have two more questions before we round up. How do you convince senior people in organizations abroad to take you seriously, especially at the beginning of your international effort? Who's going to take this one?
I'll share a lovely story actually about that, if I may. Starting exhibiting at exhibitions with tens of thousands of people, and people are going around stands. They're coming up to you, and one of the questions, especially because these exhibitions tended to be most frequently, or at least the larger ones in the States. So where are you from? And you say Malta, and they say Malta. And they either say, oh, yeah, and they have no idea where it is, really, or they think it's in Montana, where there is a Malta in Montana, or they have no idea. So your credibility is already in some doubt in the American market. And one of the things that I used to do is, on my screen, I would actually have a photo which I had taken myself of some dolphins. And what I would do is I would switch my screen onto the dolphin photos, and I say, that's why I'm in Malta. Where do you live? And then the guy says, Cleveland, or... I said, well, there you go. All right, so it sort of diffuses that. But being taken seriously, especially in the US, where if it's not invented here, there's already an element of doubt behind it.
Oh, Dave, what
Yeah,
about you?
same issue. Sometimes when you say Malta, there were cases where they didn't even ask me where is Malta. They would have asked, what is Malta? Literally. But don't forget that our business, a lot of, at least starting off, right, it's always online. So on our website, right, we did have a Maltese number, right, +356. But let's face it, if we're in the US, where a lot of our business is, +356 could mean anything. So, obviously you get the US numbers, you get the UK numbers, you get the virtual offices. So you need to show presence that you're an international company. You can't just have a Maltese number there. But it can take some more work. But typically, when you start talking products and technology, then right,
the discussion moves
then that's
into,
it's not really an issue anymore, right?
The solution really, rather than getting access. Sorry, David, I kept you out of this question. If you want to contribute to it, how do you convince senior people in organizations abroad to take you seriously, especially at the beginning of your international effort? That was the question.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting question, because my answer is obviously very unorthodox here, which is we don't speak to them. That's how we convince them. So what we do is we give access to their teams, no friction, right? So that they can use the tool, and then their teams internally convince them. And we're moving more and more towards a world where it's the teams, right? So the specialist or the manager kind of chooses the software and not the senior people, right? But again, it depends on your market and product, right? So that wouldn't have worked well for John, right? But in our case, if it's a heat mapping, recordings, feedback tool, makes a lot of sense, because the teams are on the forefront making those decisions.
Great. I'm going to have to take the last question, and then the other questions we still have, we're going to have to deal with them on a one-to-one basis after. The question is, if networking is so central to developing new business, what is your advice for effective networking on a daily basis, on what we do on a daily basis? I guess that's what the person questioning wants to question. Anyone? Networking.
Networking, I mean, on a daily basis, I mean, I used to do much more networking. Nowadays, I slow down a bit, right? But in fact, there's a good book. It's called Never Eat Alone, which I really suggest, from Keith Ferrati. And it talks about networking. I mean, you can't really force it, right? It's sometimes when you meet people, whoever they are, right, in whatever industry, right, you just take an interest in their life, right? And you always learn something. So that is the type of networking I do nowadays. And it's nothing to do with industry. It's not IT or it's not marketing. It's what I practice nowadays, more like the informal type of networking.
Yeah, John.
I think it's actually relates to the previous question also. How can you be taken seriously, especially at the beginning of your international efforts, etc., etc. And the way that we addressed it was a lot of attendance at conferences and exhibitions for our particular airport target market, speaking at those events, very important, getting the opportunity to speak at those types of events, becoming an authoritative figure, particularly for us, where the sector that we were going in didn't actually exist. So you have to actually try and convince people why using a tool dedicated for this particular task and area of the industry was better than doing it the way that they were doing it currently. So, you know, the exhibitions, the conferences, the writing of articles in trade magazines was particularly important. And one of the other things that we did was we set up a group on LinkedIn which targeted specifically people who had an interest in the airport, non-aeronautical, non-aviation revenue sectors. That was very, very powerful, because what we did was we did not use it as a tool to promote our product, but we shared ideas with the members of the group regarding new articles or new information that we were coming across, or new ideas that we would share within this group. And therefore people found it a safe space. It was curated by us, so we didn't allow other people to go in there and promote other products. I'm not talking about competitors. It just wasn't a place to do that, but it's built our credibility in the space, and we actually developed into the global world leaders in understanding this part of the airport industry.
Absolutely. Listen, we have more questions coming in, and thank you for that to all our participants, but we're going to have to deal with them on a one-to-one basis later, because we really need to wrap up this discussion. Before we go, I'd like to thank again, David Darmanin from Hotjar, David Vella from Altaro, and John De Giorgio from Shireburn for being with us and sharing these fantastic experiences. I think we've added a lot of value to people listening in and watching us today, or from tomorrow when we put this webinar, like we did last week, on the TradeMalta website. Before we go, I'd like to remind you of a very interesting webinar we have on the 13th of November on the new Pan-African Trade Agreement. We have people from Africa and who are at the very heart of those negotiations, updating us on what that can mean to doing business in Africa in the future. So that's on the 13th of November, and not next week, the week after. Until we meet again, I'd like to just thank our strategic partners, HSBC, as well as Studio 7, where we are today, my colleagues, Anton Buttigieg, our CEO, Richard Cherry, and Christine Kakia, and from me, George Cambry. I'll see you all next week.